Welcome to the Histories of Northamptonshire podcast series, and this episode number 8. Recorded on location, each episode tells the story of one of the many and varied objects which are the focus of the exhibition A History of Northamptonshire in 100 Objects. The exhibition runs at the Northampton Museum and Art Gallery between the 20th of September 2025 and February 2026. Selected by local individuals, heritage groups and the museum's own curators, each object tells a different story from the county's past. And so, to our guest for this episode.
I'm Jane Seddon. I'm the collections manager here at Northampton Museums and Art Gallery, which is possibly one of the best jobs in the world. And we have a fabulous archaeology collection along with all the other collections. But archaeology is what I'm really passionate about.
Tell me about the object that we are interested in this particular chapter of the podcast series.
We're looking at a group of objects. They are a group of microlith flints from the Mesolithic period, which is often known as the Middle Stone Age period, which lasted from 10,150 BC to 6,500 BCE. We're basically looking at objects which were held and used by some of the earliest communities living in Northamptonshire.
Jane, what is a microlith?
A microlith is a tiny little flint. We have a group of them. They are all different colours. They're really beautiful. And when you hold them up, they're so fine and so detailed that you can see the light shine through them, which I think is incredibly beautiful because they're so tiny.
And crafted, made that way. These things didn't just occur, man-made objects.
They are completely man-made objects. They're not the bits of flint that you find in a field that are naturally formed. They are deliberately made by very, very highly skilled people. Maybe craftsmen, maybe everybody was really skilled at this in that period of time. We don't know, it was so long ago, but they are beautifully skilled, beautifully crafted, made with what we call a percussive technique.
Is that similar to the way that people would describe napping these days? I've seen descriptions of the creation of flint tools which are much, much bigger, and the term napping is used. Is that the same sort of thing?
Yes, napping is the overall term we'd use, and percussive is the way, just describes the way that the maker would have hit the tool. And there are different ways of doing that. You would maybe hit with a hard stone or a soft stone, and you'd also use things like antler and bone to gently lever the flakes off and gently create beautiful pointed tips and flakes and decoration around the edges of the flint that would have made that sharp blade.
You talk in very aesthetic terms, but for whoever made this up to 12,500 years ago, this was very much an object of work. It was a tool of the community that used it.
Exactly, which is partly why it's so brilliant, because every museum in the country has flakes that look like this. I mean, these are particularly fine, but everywhere has them. But the brilliant thing about them is they were that everyday tool. It's a really strong indication that we had Mesolithic people there, because they're people that tread lightly on the landscape. They're using lots of organic materials and they leave so little remains behind. But they do leave these stone tools because stone doesn't decay like, leather fabrics do.
When you say they leave tools behind, is that simply because the tools wore out and they made new tools? Is that why these things are found and perhaps are still being found?
Could be a complete mixture. The peoples we're talking about moved around a lot, so they're moving along the river valley, the Nen River Valley. They're staying there for a while. Could be a long period, could be a short period. But naturally, when you stay somewhere, you might drop things, you might lose things. It was very easy for them, I'm sure, to make new tools. The brilliant thing about this kind of tiny tool is they would have been hafted into either wood or bone, maybe with glues made out of natural plants, flora, fauna, and also animal products as well. And they're basically these tiny little blades attached into these wooden hafted tools. So sometimes the blades fell out because they're using them for hunting, fishing, cutting plant life and plants and things like that. They're using them for a range of different things. So if the tool fell out, if one of your blades fell out, and you lost it, then you can easily then replace it.
So Jane, on that basis, we're talking about people who weren't putting down long-term communities. Why could they not put down long-term roots?
That's a really interesting question. And I think they are defining long-term roots maybe in their areas, but we're talking about hunter-gatherers. These are people not tied by farming. They're not tied by their farmhouse and needing to bring the crops in. They're basically moving around, following seasonal patterns, animals. Maybe they're following the deer or going to meet other members of family or other members of community. But there's lots of evidence to suggest they have areas that groups of people would have, moved around and lived in.
And Jane, you mentioned farming. In this time, there was no farming. So although we have sophistication in the making of tools, we don't have sophistication in tilling the land and growing vegetables, which perhaps would have placed those communities more permanently in a space. When did that happen, seeing as at the moment we're talking about the Stone Age?
I'd probably challenge you on the word sophistication here, because these are really sophisticated, highly skilled, clever people. Farming doesn't necessarily make you clever. A lot of hunter-gatherer communities, there's lots of evidence from communities today to suggest that they're having a lot more leisure time, a lot more relaxed family time engaging with their communities as hunter-gatherers than they may be if they're tied to the land, tied to a crop they have to bring in. But in terms of the actual dates, so the Neolithic is the period that comes in afterwards, and that's roughly around 6000 BCE.
Okay, so we could be talking thousands of years on from when this particular microlith was made then.
Exactly, yes. We're talking about really highly sophisticated societies with family groups like we have today. Anatomically, we're talking about the same kind of people, which is why I find this so intriguing, because these tiny flints are just a tiny glimpse into that community, those people that lived on the Nen Valley.
Jane, where were these particular microliths found?
These microliths were found in Duston. They were found on the surface of the ground where they'd been quarrying. Later quarrying had disturbed the surface and we find these microliths, but there's such big scatters of them. We know there's some form of community going on. People are living in this period in Duston. They're living at Chalk Lane in Northampton. They're living across the river valley. We find traces of these communities across the river valleys, following the gravels on the harder river surfaces.
The manufacturers of these microliths, you say they were sophisticated in their production. Somebody in particular would have been making them. Where would those skills have been found from? And indeed, how would the skills have been passed down in these travelling communities? Would there have been somebody recognised as being an expert in microlith manufacture?
That's such a great question, but we just don't know. We can try and get into the heads of these people as much as we can, but we don't know how they actually lived, whether it would have been specialists or whether everybody in the community would have been trained and known how to do it. In terms of the use of stone, the stone has been used for millions of years by hominids and human populations. Still using it today. It's such a good resource, particularly flint, because it's such a hard, strong stone that you can make these beautiful blades out of. We just don't know. They're just brilliant questions, but we know so little about these people, and we're finding out so much more through modern archaeology now.
What do these microliths say about Northamptonshire as a county? What do they say about those communities in terms of what they've left behind and what we can learn from them?
They give us a glimpse into these communities. So what we can do is we can track, maybe not the same community, but we can track communities travelling, staying at regular places, maybe where they're leaving flint behind, so they know where to come to. They're going back to those places again. It basically gives us a really strong picture of how those communities are using Northamptonshire. So they tend to be clustered in areas which are by the river, on hard river gravels, so they can exploit the river, because rivers are great for fish and other forms of food that you can get really easily, or much more easily than the land from rivers. But also they're positioning themselves slightly high up, so they're in a position where they feel safe and defended and controlled. We talked about not farming, but they're already managing those landscapes, so they know where to look. They might be altering those landscapes by cutting down certain forms of vegetation as well.
If there was one lesson that we could perhaps learn from those communities, from anything up to 12,500 years ago, what would you say the biggest single lesson that we could learn in modern day Northamptonshire might be?
I love the way that these things survive. They're natural rocks, natural flint, but they've been altered by human beings. From an environmental perspective, these people trod lightly on their landscape. They leave us very little to find, but on the other side, they don't leave the chemicals and the plastics that we leave today. And I think we can learn from reusing and using materials which maybe don't have such a strong impact on our world.
That is a fascinating and fantastic lesson for us all to learn, and a great place to stop this particular conversation. Jane, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this Histories of Northamptonshire podcast. If you would like to find out more about the objects or listen to other episodes in the series, go to www.northamptonmuseums.com. Alternatively, you can visit the Northampton Museum and Art Gallery, where you can see the A History of Northamptonshire in 100 Objects exhibition for yourself. The Histories of Northamptonshire project is funded by Arts Council England as part of the National Portfolio Programme.